The stage is set. The Boston Celtics versus the Philadelphia 76ers, Round 1, 2026 NBA playoffs, and we got a full preview coming up right now on the Your Celtics Source podcast.
Tatum is hurt. Tatum is down.
Can Brown be the number one on a title contender?
He can be, but he doesn't deserve that distinction.
You hear the "We Want Boston" chants. They're going to get him.
You want Boston? You got Boston. What's up, everybody? And welcome in to the Your Celtics Source podcast, coming to you on a Friday morning. And right off the bat, I will just say that maybe the Orlando Magic would have been an easier team to face in round 1 if they were able to sneak by the 76ers, just because their entire franchise, their entire team is in disarray right now. But as far as the storylines, the excitement from a NBA viewership standpoint, even as a Celtics fan, a battle against the 76ers, with or without Joel Embiid, we'll talk about his status later, is far and away a more enjoyable matchup just to watch. I mean, the drama that goes back 30, 40 years between these two franchises, two of the oldest cities in the United States, the history that goes back between these two teams, it's just a great first round matchup that shouldn't be too difficult for the Celtics. It shouldn't be one that the Celtics cannot handle in any way, but will still bring you that excitement. And Tyrese Maxey, he is a fun, young NBA player that actually has, in the last couple of years, had to just take over this franchise with the absence of Joel Embiid and Paul George missing, 25 games this season with the suspension. Tyrese Maxey has kept the 76ers afloat. And yes, they have a negative, point differential when it's just Tyrese Maxey on the court. But the 76ers have given the Celtics trouble this season and last couple of seasons, mainly because the Celtics really have no answer for the speed and the athleticism of Tyrese Maxey. He's probably not as talented as a guy like Jaylen Brunson is, or an Anthony Edwards for sure, but they play very similar styles, right? He can just drive past you in a moment's notice. You blink and he's by you and gets to the rim. The Celtics have really struggled staying in front of him, slowing down his pace. And obviously, if the Celtics play any sort of drop coverage in this series, Tyrese Maxey could go off and explode, coming around screens and shooting threes. But for the most part, I think the Celtics should be able to handle them in 5 or so games. And we'll get to an accurate prediction later, and, maybe a more in-depth prediction at the end of the show. Sweep is definitely on the table, but, I don't want to get too cocky. And to be honest, I think that, the Celtics go cold for a game. Tyrese Maxey, gets hot. VJ Edgecombe, Paul George can add into that. I think the 76ers can give you a battle in each game. And, one of the most, I think, from, people that don't watch, every NBA game, they don't watch game by game, and they see a sweep in the playoffs and are like, yeah, the Celtics absolutely destroy, for example, that Dallas Mavericks series in the finals a couple years ago, right? The Celtics absolutely destroyed the Dallas Mavericks, right? They won 3-1, they won 4-1, they were up 3-0. But if you look back at the actual games, they were close games, each and every single one of them. It was just a couple of possessions that swung in the Celtics' favor that allowed them to get that win. And because of the way the NBA works, it's not a total point system. It's just you win or you lose. It's binary. But the way that, the Celtics get to those victories, are very close in those margins, right? So you look at a series like this 76ers series, and, the Celtics could sweep. They could win in 5, but they will have to handle the offense that the 76ers bring and then be able to make shots on a 76ers team that is not, a top team defensively for sure. definitely offensively, they have struggled without the production of a Joel Embiid, without the production of a Paul George. They're sort of bottom tier in shooting efficiency. That being said, the Celtics, we talked about this before, they've had a struggle with them over the last couple of seasons. And you got to take in the fact that Joel Embiid didn't play in some of these games. And obviously, Paul George didn't play in a lot of these games, including the most recent one about a month ago, where I believe that was Keita's, breakout game where he had like 25 points and like 20 rebounds or something like that. We'll talk about the Joel Embiid status later, because that is obviously possibly, and actually I'm not even going to say possibly, definitely the biggest X factor in this series. Who knows what, could happen to him. But I do want to start by looking at some of the Celtics' strengths in this series, and then the concerns. And then we'll sort of go into the keys to winning this series comfortably and quickly. But the strengths, right? I think you have a pretty good advantage in that star power, right? I do believe Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum will be able to outperform the combination of whether it's Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe, who obviously is a rookie and can go through the rookie slump and the rookie playoff experience at any time. You add in Paul George. I think the Paul George and Tyrese Maxey duo is still a step below the Tatum and Brown duo, even with Tatum at, subpar health and percentage, although he continues to ramp up, and obviously this week off is only going to help him in that. Right, I think you have more depth, right? We saw in that playing game, the 76ers had to play Tyrese Maxey 42 minutes just to, squeak by, nearly, lose to the Magic, right? They don't have anything else behind those guys offensively for sure, right? The Celtics are easily going to be able to play Baylor Shireman's, Ugo Gonzalez, depth even, probably Jordan Walsh will get a run guarding Tyrese Maxey for a bit, right? And that will allow Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown to play less minutes. They'll only need to play, hopefully, in the 30s, 35 minutes in this first round. And that obviously allows the two of them to be more rested when they're on the court, more athletic, more physical because they're not, out of breath. And Jayson Tatum, right, he played, a couple games later in the season, around 40 minutes, as Joe Mazzulla worked hard to ramp him up quickly. But he still might get out of breath early in these series, right? So any, time you can get with Jayson Tatum on the bench is a benefit for this team, right? I think that, the Celtics have performed pretty consistently against these weaker teams throughout the NBA season. That's what allowed them really, until Jayson Tatum came back, to be, a top 2 team in the Eastern Conference. Once, Tatum came back, they won against the 76ers. They were able to keep that, or they won against the Thunder. They won against the Spurs, right? Obviously, they lost that Knicks game without Jaylen Brown, but they were able to win some of these games once Jayson Tatum came back. And yes, there were some outlier great performances against the Rockets, against the Lakers throughout the season, but really what kept them where they were was just dominating these poor opponents. But the 76ers, as we have said multiple times on this show, just have given the Celtics fits. And, for the most part, they've won these games, but they haven't been games that you were able to easily dominate. Tyrese Maxey has, really hurt them. And so the Celtics need to find a way to, even if it's not Jaylen Brown or Derrick White or whoever's guarding him, could you put a Jordan Walsh? Could you put an Ugo Gonzalez on the floor for 10 minutes a night just to give your spark, the team a spark defensively, offensively, whatever it may be? Shireman could close maybe if Derrick White doesn't have it going shooting well. We'll talk about Derrick White in just a second because his shooting slump has been something that I thought was going to go away when Jayson Tatum returned, but it just has not. It's just, and obviously the playoffs are a reset for him, but that being said, right, you can't have, maybe in the first round it's okay, but you're going to need, some production from Derrick White offensively later. Some of the concerns for the Boston Celtics, I think we talked a little bit about it, but, weaker competition in the Eastern Conference. does that play a factor into the Celtics' playoff success throughout the entire playoffs, right? Probably it's not a problem in round 1, but maybe later in the rounds against the Knicks, Pistons, whoever you may face in the NBA Finals. And then it's Derrick White, right? And I just briefly mentioned it, but now we have to talk about Derrick White and the slump that he was in, right? I mean, he went from, a 30 or a 40 really 45% field goal shooter down to 39%, 32% from 3 this season. He just has to be a scoring threat, because defenses will start to ignore him no matter how good Derrick White is. Defenses in the playoffs will start to ignore him, especially if like a Baylor Shireman's on the floor as well. You're not going to leave Baylor Shireman open for Derrick White shooting if Derrick White continues to slump like that. And that just, allows the doubles on Jayson Tatum, allows the doubles on Jaylen Brown. That fully sort of just halts your offense. You go into that sort of isolation, pull-up threes, which Derrick White really has taken too many of this season. But the team as a whole, right? That's how they lost that series to the Knicks. Just too many isolation threes late in the game. Too much slow offense. All of that stuff that, just hasn't been a case this season. Right? The Celtics haven't changed their pace or anything like that. They're still last in pace. But the ability of Jaylen Brown to get into the paint and just revive the mid-range shot for this team has been vital for their success this season. Right? I think Derrick White, he's still going to be valuable in his defense, in his playmaking, his facilitating, his IQ for the game, but he's going to have to make shots to keep defenses honest. And Peyton Pritchard, right? In the last couple of seasons, he's sort of, been a little quiet in the postseason, right? And I think that's, when teams start to game plan for your better players, that tends to happen, right? And especially because Peyton Pritchard is a guy that everybody now has marked on their sheets in their game plan. He's going to get better defenders, especially if he's out there with like a Tatum and not, a full starting 5 unit. Defenses can gear into them. And a lot of times, your actual better defenders are those second sort of unit second tier players, because your first unit has all your offensive only guys and a Tyrese Maxey and a, Paul George is not that right now, or at least historically, right? He's been more of a two-way player. But, Joel Embiid, especially out on the perimeter if he's playing. So, right, at Tyrese Maxey, right, he's not going to be playing much defense, but you can take him out and you put in, guys like Andre Drummond, put in, a guy like Obre Jr., Adam Boneh, right? Those guys, right, can, provide a little bit more defensive pressure on a guy like Peyton Pritchard, especially if he's the one out there running the offense, right? And then you're just going to have to get shooting from a Shireman, which I actually think he can, even though this will be his first run really as an actual role player in these playoffs. He's going to get great looks. He just has to knock them down, and I think he will. Sam Hauser has to continue to do what he's done over the last many seasons in the playoffs, and maybe you get some other production, some bonus production from a Jordan Walsh, from a Ron Harper Jr., from an Ugo Gonzalez, who Joe Mazzulla has not played in a while. He did play in, obviously, that last game of the season and in the Pelicans game. But down the stretch of the season, Ugo Gonzalez didn't really have, much of an impact on the games. I don't know why that is. Joe Mazzulla just, I don't know if he, forgot about him or he just didn't want to play him, because he wasn't bad when he was out there. I think Jordan Walsh had regained that confidence in his three-point shooting, and maybe that played a factor into it. But I would like to see, at least in the early rounds, especially if you're comfortable, you have comfortable leads, and you can put out there a guy that maybe is not, as good offensively, can you put a guy like Ugo Gonzalez just to give him those playoff minutes, that experience that he can use not only this season, but in years to come. And, the 76ers' weakness on the other side of this, right, is their depth. We talked about this a little bit before. Their limited shooting. They don't have great rim protection, especially without Joel Embiid. Andre Drummond, he's a great, center out on the perimeter, can move his feet well. definitely not a rim protector, and him and Peyton Pritchard are pretty equal in terms of blocking shots and contesting shots at the rim, and that says something. Peyton Pritchard is a 6'1" guard. Andre Drummond is a 6'8", 6'9", maybe even taller forward / center. Right, so that's a pretty stark or I guess lack of impact that he has around the rim, especially because he's going to be their main center for the most part. Right, and then Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum have been through this for 9+ years. They're going to, I know this is a little bit of a different season, a season that they haven't really had in a while. I compare this season back to the early 20s, even the 2019, 2020 seasons, right, where they were just figuring it out. They had a lot of younger players around them, but they were young as well. And now I think that gone through this whole experience, winning a championship. And the level that Jaylen Brown has played at this season, those two can carry this team to another championship, at least a NBA Finals, right? I don't know if they'll be able to beat the Thunder or the Spurs or the Nuggets, whoever comes out, but I think they're capable of beating the Knicks, definitely capable of beating the Pistons. So, for a season that was supposed to be a gap year, a season that was supposed to be a year that had no expectations on it, there are now some expectations that you need to perform in these playoffs, which is actually just wild to say that. But I'm gonna go Celtics in. Let's say I'm gonna go 5. I'm gonna go 5. I was hesitant to say 4. I was thinking maybe 6. Could Tyrese Maxey get 2 games off of them? I don't think so. But there obviously is the fact that if the 76ers are able to keep this close, the possibility that Joel Embiid returns, right? And he's probably going to be out for the entire season. If he does come back at all, it will be very limited. He'll be on minutes restrictions and whatever. And to be honest, for his sake, I actually think the Celtics would, a limited Joel Embiid would hurt them more than without him, because to be honest, they'll be trying to force feed him the ball. He'll be missing shots. He'll be out of rhythm. Celtics will be able to capitalize on that without a doubt. So I really do think that if Joel Embiid, is not fully back, he shouldn't come back at all. And to be honest, the chances of him being fully back are, second to none. There is the chance that he comes back and he, can perform at a high level, right? He could steal a couple games from the Celtics, and especially if Tyrese Maxey is already able to get a couple games, this could become a series very quickly. So the hope is that Celtics can get through this series quickly, or at least have a 3-0, 3-1 lead by the time Joel Embiid even thinks about coming back, and that could change his opinions and his, thoughts. He could be having second guesses on whether he should come back this season. That's the best case scenario for the Celtics. But yeah, that pretty much does it. I think Celtics will pretty easily handle the 76ers. Before we wrap up, I do want to quickly talk about the LaMelo Ball situation over the last couple of days, with that controversy, fouling Bam Adebayo, plus the fact that he actually hit a game winner and all the antics around him. And then my final thing that I want to talk about is the news that came out Thursday morning that Cade Cunningham and Luka Doncic have been reinstated in terms of the 65-game rule. So they are eligible for all NBA awards. How does that affect Jaylen Brown? Not for MVP, because I think that's a far sort of clear ahead leader and winner really in SGA, followed closely by Wemby. Although Jokic did make a sort of late season run. But that first team All-NBA selection, does Jaylen Brown even make the team? But let's start with the LaMelo Ball situation, right? LaMelo Ball is an interesting character because he has great talent. He is, one of the best passers in the league. Obviously, he's an elite scorer. It's the maturity level with him, right? It's not only that play that we saw where he, fully, took out Bam's legs, whether he admits it or not. And, the apology is whatever after the game. But it's the, driving reckless around Charlotte, right? Those crashes. It's the, the fact that he won the game for the Heat, but at the same time, multiple moments throughout the game, he lost it he won it for the Hornets, and then he lost it for the Hornets, right? The amount of plays that he looked great offensively, especially in overtimes, he had the same number of plays where he took a possession off defensively, he got backdoor cut, he just fell asleep completely, was, out of position, made stupid decisions, stupid fouls, all that stuff. He just has to clean up if the Hornets are going to have any chance, because they have a talent, maybe not this year, but they have the talent. They can add on it next couple of years, but they'll go as far as LaMelo Ball takes them. He's the leader of this team, and it all depends on whether LaMelo Ball can clean up not only the maturity stuff off the court, but just the attention to details, playing defense on every possession, not taking key possessions off, right? It's one thing to take, a possession off or two early in the game, but in overtime, you can't score a bucket, but then give the bucket right back up on the other end. That just cannot happen. You will not win games doing that, and that's, pretty represented in the fact that they are a 500 or at least close to 500 team, despite that, historic really run that they went on in the back half of the season, right? They're a 500 team for the season. Their net rating and their, points differential and all that is showcased in that, right? So they're a typical, 8, 9, 10 seed, and that's where they are. They could win against the Magic. I actually might pick them against the Magic, given how, basically the meltdown that the Magic have had in the back half of the season. Really a full disappointment this season for the Magic as a whole. Paul Banchero has just been not great, to put it lightly, this season. Did not take that step forward. So I actually might pick the Hornets to beat the Magic. And I actually think the Hornets could give the Pistons a run for their money, right? I'm going to pick the Pistons. I think it'll be in 6 games at most. But, the Hornets can get hot shooting. We know that the Pistons offense has the ability to get stagnant, especially if Cade isn't going, right? They don't have much shooting and whatever around them. I actually think the best case scenario for the Pistons, or I guess, that Cade injury allowed them to figure out other ways to score offensively. I think it really helped them. But they could win that series, right? It's not out of the question, right? I don't think it's going to be, a close series, but it could be, right? It's not, there are more bigger spreads in matchups than this one, in my opinion. But we'll watch that series as it goes on. Let's wrap up with this Jaylen Brown All-NBA selection, right? The news that Luka and Cunningham are now back on. I think, obviously SGA, Wemby, Jokic, and I think at this point you have to put Luka, are 4 locks for the first team All-NBA. It comes down to Cade Cunningham and Jaylen Brown. And to be honest, the Pistons are a 1 seed. Cade Cunningham led this team in everything. I think Cade Cunningham, whether it's right or wrong, is going to get the nod over Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown, is probably going to be that first guy on the second team, along with probably Kawhi Leonard. Obviously Anthony Edwards will probably be there as well. Maybe Steph Curry. Kevin Durant's been great this season as well. I don't know who would fill out the rest of the roster spots. But it's just, the unfortunate part about this is really the just back half of the season run that Luka went on by himself, really, just put him into the conversation that he was not with, for the majority of this season, right? He was definitely a second-tier player, just because of how the Lakers were doing, right? But now that, he was able to bring them up to a 3 seed before he got hurt, and obviously the Lakers fall to the 4th seed afterwards. But I really do think that Luka, is going to get MVP votes. He's going to get probably, 1 or 2 first-place votes, in fact. He's probably going to be that 4th seed, and then that means Cade Cunningham over Jaylen Brown. And to be honest, I really didn't want to pick between them because I actually think they both should be first-team players. but that just is how it is. But, the 65 game rule, there's got to be changes to that. You got to make changes to tanking. You got to, people have been talking about this, right? The NBA, the money and whatever coming into this team with the expansions and all that stuff, right, is sort of put a cloud over the entire season. Whereas, if your team was doing well, and you were watching great basketball each and every night with stars playing, it was a great season to watch. But if you were a fan or watching some of the, the behind the scenes of what was happening in the NBA this season, the sort of back half of the league, over a third of the teams tanking this year, and not even just tanking, deliberately, finding ways to lose, subbing players, fouling to give the other team another chance of taking a shot, winning game, Kings, all that stuff. Just utter stupidity. And, I don't want to call it stupid because you do what you had to do. And that's just is what it is. There's going to be changes. Obviously, those proposals, we've talked about them before at length. All terrible proposals, in my opinion. Right? You got to incentivize winning somehow, or you're just going to continue to get this. And it might be all blown out of the water given how good of a draft this is. We will wait and see. The unfortunate part, actually, of this all is that, a small chance, but not no chance, that the OKC Thunder get a lottery pick because they held the Clippers pick from that disastrous Paul George trade. I think, it's a small chance, but now that the Clippers have fallen out after their loss to the Warriors, by the way, what a fantastic performance from Steph Curry, Draymond Green, turning back the clock, and even Al Horford was terrific down the stretch in that game. Good for him, because he's really struggled this season and had his ups and downs, so that's great to see. I don't think they're going to beat the Suns, and obviously it's going to be a sweep either way against the OKC Thunder, but, nice to see perhaps the last great playoff game, or in general, if they lose to the Suns this last season that they make the playoffs. We'll see what happens with Jimmy Butler next season. So just a great, moment for the NBA and Steph Curry and Draymond Green. But yeah, I'm going to wrap it up here. We will probably not be, doing any, full podcast or reactions for the first week or so of these games, as if you don't know already, I'm going to Japan with my family. We're leaving this afternoon, so we'll have little clips. I'll make some shorts and stuff like that reacting to the games. So we'll do all that, highlights and whatever we'll have out there after the game, so stay tuned on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, of course. But this will be our full preview, and then I get back the 28th. We'll probably do some sort of reaction midway through the round one here, but we won't have stuff after every game. When I get back, we'll be doing stuff after every game, and as we dive deeper into the playoffs, we'll be doing stuff every day. We'll do live streams for other NBA series as well. So stay tuned for all of that. You can check out this podcast and all podcast episodes here on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you listen to your podcast. Please give a like and a rating there. That's really appreciated. And the quest for Banner 19 continues. It starts round 1, Philadelphia 76ers, game 1, 1 o'clock Eastern on ESPN at TD Garden. And until next time, go Seas.